I'm the narcissist. If we're being real, this was to be expected.
Can you show my boxes? I should look at the shirt.
He is speaking out publicly against Rachel Zegler and blaming her for the film's catastrophic failure at the box office.
I love you. It was so amazing.
Her attitude and her hopefuls for the role of Maria in his remake of West Side Story. No big agent, no famous last name, just a teenager with a camera and a dream. And when the film hit theaters, critics couldn't stop gushing. A star is born. You'd think being cast as Snow White would be a career-defining moment. For Rachel Zegler, it was the beginning of the end.
We should take a trip as a family.
Yes, if you can leave your work behind.
Strictly family time.
When you experience Nightmare Creatures and play everything it has to offer, it is fair to consider this as the quintessential piece to the Souls-like genre that no one ever played or known about. Some may have said it before, but it's basically Bloodborne before Bloodborne, a common consensus I believe any Souls fan would come to an agreement with, I imagine. Personally, I have never played a Dark Souls or a Souls-like game, so I couldn't really give my 2 cents on the matter. But what I can say is that, as a lover of survival horror, this game is so much different to still feel familiar. And I absolutely love that. A gritty and dark harrowing atmosphere, disgusting and grotesque designs, a gothic setting that beckons one to see this emphasis on gothic horror as a main theme, or the overall in combat that expands upon what was previously established for those before this one that flips everything on its head. There is so much spectacle here at first glance, and this could be overwhelming for the player with this new take on the formula of survival horror. The survival horror title is truly a hidden gem, developed by Callisto Entertainment and published by Activision. We see a gothic horror setting set in London, where the main antagonist, Adam Crowley, a devil-worshipping cult, brings about the process of using deceased human body parts to become superhuman.
Hey, what's up, chat? Say hello.
This process does not go as expected.
Like the video, share it with your friends. Just don't tell them that I'm a virgin.
You guessed it.
That's embarrassing.
Nightmare Creatures.
I wouldn't want to tell anybody on the
It's
internet.
supernatural evil.
I don't want anyone. Oh, son of a bitch. I don't want anyone on the internet to know that I'm a virgin.
Ignitus and Nadia,
Thanks, pal.
the 2 main playable protagonists, are sent out to battle against the Brotherhood.
Virgin
to
power.
exterminate the Nightmare Creatures
Sorry.
in an effort to
I'm being
purge
so
London
lame.
of this unspeakable horror.
Son of a
At the main
bitch.
menu, you get the character of your choosing. You play as either Ignitus
Like the
or
video,
Nadia.
share it with your
Both have their own respective
friends.
qualities that are distinctive
Who the hell is
enough
this little
to
guy?
warrant
It looks like
playthrough.
Mr. Miyagi
Regardless
from,
of your player of choice, you'll be pretty much going through the same
Okay.
linear levels that will
What's he
see you
gonna do?
fight against enemies that are undoubtedly very tough and difficult to combat against. This is one of the more prioritized fundamentals when studying the game design in Nightmare Creatures. Essentially, your character, let's say Nadia, is equipped primarily with a melee weapon, which is the only weapon that you can use to aid yourself in your survival against the monsters in gameplay. There's a surprising amount of versatility in the player's approach to movement with their defense against enemies' attacks or offense with attacking with damage yourself. It's very much akin to Dark Souls in a way, where parrying is essential, and without it, you'll be getting dealt lots of damage repetitively. You have to parry an attack, and then once the enemy finishes their attack, deal the next strike until you finish the dealing blow. It's a bit of patience on the player's end, but that's the point when it comes to these types of games with a heavy emphasis on combat. The amount of traversal in the player's movement is very pleasing to experiment with. I love when games allow this amount of mobility to the player's movement because it allows for experimentation on the player's behalf, when either being passive or using the time you have before combating an enemy to understand the overall mechanics, which gives nuance. Once you are ready and feeling confident,
How's it going,
then
pal?
you venture out to the unknown to experiment through this trial.
You know,
and
I used
error.
to,
Believe me when I say that you
forget
see
it.
yourself getting dealt damage.
Oh my god! I didn't even
Enemies are
notice
really
that.
quick and are very malicious in their nature. They will not only emit damage aggressively, but also know when to evade a player's attack, to cover the ground, and not to strike yet again. This shows how the enemy AI doesn't mess around, but also reflects much of the player's gameplay. With the control scheme, You'll see yourself using the square button to mostly deal damage in a 1 or 2 attack combo. Triangle will see you dealing damage with an upward slash on your weapon. Circle is a proprietary block function that parries an enemy's attack, and X is to evade in either 4 directions. There is a lot of attention to detail when it comes to not only making the best of the control scheme when it comes to combat, but incorporating these features into a seamless transition when it comes to the player's experimentation of always becoming fluid in motion. Say, for example, you want to evade an enemy's attack, but then go into an immediate strike against an enemy by countering with a leg sweep to then transition into a 1 to 2 hit combo with your weapon. Then you have the ability to do that. If not that, then jump in the air to slash against the enemy if successful. The amount of versatility that lies dormant at the player's disposal is honestly so refreshing that I did not at all expect to find in this gameplay. It felt like I was right at home with this gameplay because of how familiar it felt. Yet it was difficult enough to implant this message into me that this isn't the typical roundabout I'm accustomed to. The experimentation here is practically essential to have any further level of progression that you'll need to figure out through this failure. But even though it may come off as foreboding, it allows for room for growth. One of the biggest reasons why I'm such a huge fan of character action games, or in general, the survival horror genre. I had a great time playing this game, and I can see why people are recommending me this
Son of a bitch, I have it in like the easiest fucking dumb fucking. Alright, that's it, we gotta play another game.
Inventory, or the same controls that we are accustomed to, but I would say that this survival horror experience is unique in itself to make it worth investing your time into.
What game should I play? What do you got? Come on, chat. Help me out here. Oh, this game used to be okay. This is like a role-playing game?
D, from just the title alone, is enough to warrant really anyone.
I'm gonna give this one a shot.
To experience this weird
I've never tried it.
Game for themselves. To further this curiosity, the development behind D is interesting. Developed by Warp, mostly known for the title here, as well as Enemy Zero and the indirect sequel, D2, had to jump through a couple of loopholes to get D published. The creator, Kenji Ino, would take inspiration and influence from Transylvania, particularly that of Dracula, when it came to the setting, themes, atmosphere, and story. However, he found that the inclusion of violence and the taboo nature of cannibalism was a necessary inclusion, although this was a heavily panned and criticized subject when featured in a video game, which was a huge risk and gamble. However, Eno thought this would cement not only his artistic and weird creative decision, but also drive sales and interest in people wanting to buy the game. By doing this, he would submit a quote-unquote clean version to publishers for approval, and at the last second, before they would ship copies, he switched it to the more grotesque and violent version. It was a very risky move on his part, but this would prove to be the best outcome he and his development team could have ever asked for, as this violent version sold phenomenally, exceeding their initial sale expectations. They were praised with universal acclaim, and after playing it myself, I can see why. Indeed, you play as Laura Harris, the daughter of her father, Dr. Richter Harris, has Laura contacted with a very disturbing and out-of-pocket message from the police that no one ever would rightfully want to hear. Her father commits a mass murdering spree, killing everyone in the hospital where he worked at, and barricaded himself inside for no one to get in, and no one to get out. For such a revelation like this, Laura rushes to the hospital to discover the truth for herself. As if things can get any weirder, Laura finds a portal that transports her to an alternate reality, where she finds herself in a medieval castle, which is where the game truly begins. As the player can see for themselves, this game isn't like any other survival horror game they've probably seen. Especially for those who've experienced this game back in the day. This gameplay is unique as it uses FMV, full motion video, in order to simulate this experience in real time when it comes to movement throughout the environment, interactions with objects, and the creation of the atmosphere. In many ways, this could have been one of the first instances of point-and-click gameplay, as well as the interactive genre of video games where the player watches the gameplay play itself. Because of this, the gameplay is very simplistic on paper. You can only use the left analog control stick to move in 4 directions the player is facing. As you explore the castle, you have to walk throughout each linear
I have
hall,
absolutely no idea how to play that
or
game.
expansive room to roam about and figure out puzzles. That's pretty much the idea of D, and there isn't much more to this gameplay. Much of the time, you can get the feeling of getting lost. I found myself getting lost in many of these instances.
Let me try this.
Looking around and have no idea what to interact with or what to do. There is never a general guide, or, at the very least, a hint to give the player the push to figure out how to solve a puzzle. or just have an idea of how to progress. This is standard in most survival horror games, at least at the time, as it urges the player to figure out the gameplay mechanics for themselves, which creates not only immersion in this atmosphere, but also investment in experimentation with your approach to the gameplay. I will say that there is frustration in the movement. Laura's walk cycle is very slow and will require the utmost patience on the player's behalf just to get to the location of interest. As you're moving around the environment, sometimes you have to stop in your tracks just to explore another part of the room, or just interact with an object. One of the best aspects of D is the presentation itself. Much of this atmosphere is built solely on sound design. It's undeniable that it makes the best out of this by having simply the ambience of the castle give off this looming dread that feels claustrophobic and daunting to instill a hint of fear into you. It's also just quiet, with no footsteps of the player or sound, and I feel like this quietness adds more tension and pressure into this gameplay design.
Son of a bitch. This game really is a shitty game, so I'm not gonna play it. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna have to play F-Zero.
To add on to this, the cinematics of the FMV cutscenes, while unintentional, give off this unsettling vibe to the player because of how uncanny the 3D models of the characters look. It's very experimental, much like many of the PS1 games for its time, as we transition from the 2D pixel art of the SNES to the now more technologically advanced hardware capable of processing graphical qualities like this one. And it's because of this that contributes to making D very unsettling. It's an experience that is only 1 to 2 hours at best, but while it may be a bit rough around the edges gameplay-wise to get into, is really made up with its overall presentation when building the suspenseful atmosphere that captivates the player into wanting to play D. If there was a Japan-only PS1 horror game that cemented the transition from the Western PS1 horror games to the now more obscure and downright unsettling and eerie Japan-only PS1 horror games we are covering, then it would be this game in particular. I imagine you never knew about it until I mentioned it, but even if you did happen to know about it, then I imagine you wish you could erase it from your memory. Paranoia Escape is one of the most bizarre and weird horror games on the PS1 that anyone could ever experience for themselves and play. It's Japan only for a reason. I imagine if this was released for Western audiences, it would not only be lost in confusion, but probably traumatize a generation. Paranoia Escape is what I would call a game that emulates elements of horror because, in reality, in a shocking twist, it is anything but horror. But what it does to instill this unsettling and uncomfortable aura that surrounds the player when playing this game is through a specific type of horror, body horror. Much of this atmosphere is beyond human comprehension as it manipulates the body anatomy and fuses it together to create another out-of-universe hellscape that is beyond our imagination. This is the best conclusion I can come to because I honestly don't know how to convey what I feel about this game. It comprises such an odd yet fascinating presentation that's meant to discuss the player, but at the same time, simulates this pinball arcade-like gameplay that compels you to want to play. From the time I played this weird pinball game, I came to find that you play as two skeletons that use bones that emulate bumpers to hit a floating brain that is the pinball, which you have to use to hit the environment to garner points to add a total to your high score. There are obstacles in your path that you must avoid if you want to make it to the end of the stage, as there are multiple throughout the various levels that only get weirder and disgusting in their design. The main factor here that compels you to play is not necessarily the gameplay itself, but the perspective of being put into the mind of an individual who wanted to create this game that incorporated the most disgusting, grotesque, and putrid components imaginable that would make you uncomfortable. There is a reason why this game is called Paranoia Escape, and that's because it's to make you paranoid of the unknown.
looking for Star Fox. I know I got it somewhere. There we go.
PS1 owners who lived elsewhere other than Japan had the misfortune of the inability to have access to Japan-only exclusive games on the PS1. The PS1 has a grand total of 4,105 games specifically made for the console, as far as we are aware. Half of this was released to international countries, while the other half, the total being 2,365, region-locked to Japan only. Games that would mostly be inaccessible for many years. This would change, however, due to the hard dedication applied by fans of the PS1, who invested much of their time translating these Japanese-only titles with an English release and sometimes other foreign languages as well, such as Spanish. This is honestly the best outcome for any fan who's a huge lover of not only the PS1, but really wants to experience these obscure titles, such as the one I'm covering today called Airu, also known as in English, Something Is Here. Airu is one of the many PS1 only titles to get a fan translation and become playable for English speakers. In Airu, you play as Takuya Inaba, an exchange student attending a high school located on an island that is implied to have strong cultural traditions that are heavily implied, foreshadowing the more recurring theme of gameplay. While here, you find yourself helping other classmates at a cultural festival that will take place the following day. This requires them to be all hands on deck as they stay overnight to prepare for everything. However, once they find themselves past after dark, they're mysteriously locked in the high school and cannot get out. This leads to lots of discussion amongst the students with confusion, drama, and fear with the unannounced and ominous atmosphere that takes place in the school, which leads to many older classmates being killed one by one. It's very subtle in its tone, as much of this pacing is built up slowly. It creates lots of this tension by immersing the player in a first-person perspective, having you talk among your classmates while doing objectives to undergo level progression. Through this, you get lots of dialogue that are very heavy in its exposition, which you'll most likely see Inaba conversing with his classmates or the teachers in the facility. It also has a heavy emphasis on exploration as a sole gameplay mechanic that will see the player traversing the school to locate items or just backtracking a lot to talk with classmates. Also, while hiding occasionally from the enemy encounters you come to find while in gameplay. It reminds me of Clock Tower, the first Fear, in its very mysterious atmosphere while incorporating gameplay mechanics where you'll see the player having utilized the environment to hide from the stalker enemy, which created this intuitive gameplay design while instilling fear into the player. This premise is also seen here in Airu as well, but feels more immersive thanks to the first-person camera angle. It makes this feeling much more personal. However, while this does sound like good elements that should have a good payoff, what the game suffers heavily from is this constant abundance of heavy exposition amongst the characters. You will be talking a lot of the time to talk to other characters in the game, which I would argue makes up a good chunk of the gameplay where you'll have to backtrack consecutively to do these monotonous tasks, or you will see the player just talking repetitively to the same cast members, which makes the progression slow in its pacing. A good hour passed, and I just explored the same building over and over again, so I felt like I was just getting bored.
Son of
and I
a
was thinking
bitch,
to
dude.
myself, where is the horror? The horror is here, but that buildup is a very, very slow burn, which will require the player to have to wait patiently to get there. And I think the payoff is decent.
What the
Reaching its
fuck?
climax once you witness the death of your classmates unfold in front of you. I do like this hide-and-seek mechanic, but the bombastic music ruins the tension a bit. Having a soft ambience that is very low and quiet creates even more of a formidable atmosphere. Even better if having no music at all whatsoever, and just the ambience of the stalker enemy's footstep closing in on your position. From what I played of Airu, it was just okay. The build-up could be done better, but I will say the atmosphere is very well done. This will just require lots of patience on the player's behalf.
Yeah, I know, LJN sucks. We have bad news about LJN.
As we further this descent into more Japan-exclusive titles, we come to find ourselves in the deep end, deep into this abyss of a horror game called Germs, Neurowarada Machi, known in English as Germs, the Targeted Town. This is a very obscure horror game that I found while conducting research that I honestly can't come to understand or find words to what to talk about when it comes to this game. There is so much variety, complexity, and replayability found in a seemingly small yet massive open world that fills you with so much reason to go about and explore. One of the main gameplay mechanics that the game pushes the player to use to their best efforts. From my understanding, you play as a journalist who comes back to his hometown to investigate disturbances in the expanding invasion of mutants occurring throughout the city, the slowly taking over, and mandates the player to go about and uncover these odd and bizarre sightings that you find by roaming around the desolate city, talking to the very few people available, and recording these statements taken from people as a means of level progression. It sounds very simple on paper, but in the end, it isn't. I think one thing that did handicap my experience of gameplay is the language barrier, as the game, of course, uses Japanese. So most of the time, I had no idea what I was doing. But this didn't stop me from becoming intrigued and wanting to explore what this game had to offer. You start in a first-person view, assuming the role of a journalist where you can browse the desktop by checking the map, saving your game, or reading emails. While doing this, you can talk to your coworker, presumably conversing about the mutants that are taking over the city. It was very vague, and I didn't really understand the goal here, but I saw an exit out of the office and took it. Once exiting, you're bestowed upon a vast, empty, and lifeless world with not a hint of life, only the player to themselves and a car they can drive to run around the never-ending world that goes on and on, seemingly forever. The controls are admittedly very outdated and awkward to move around. I had to use the left analog stick to look around my general area, and the buttons on the right side of the controller to move around, such as the X or triangle button to move up and down while walking. This doesn't translate better while driving, as it becomes a painful drag to carry on. I saw myself bumping into the geometry of the environment and making a collision where the car would completely stop, and I'd have to use the shoulder bumpers to reverse the car to correct my position and drive off yet again into this colorless world. But given the benefit of the doubt, it was one of the very first horror games for its time to incorporate this gameplay style, and of course, it was very experimental. While in gameplay, the aforementioned talking to the other people making comments, whether in a train station or in a fast food place, you see the player taking any comments whatsoever and documenting them. From what I saw, it seemed to build their stats as once I finished talking in front of the people, I saw my vitality go up. I was taken back a bit and did not expect that, but it was nice to see a sense of progression and trying to understand these mechanics, even if it was very minor like this. But other than the exploration in this world, all you really do is simply walk around aimlessly, not really understanding what to do, only going off with these big, comically large red arrows to guide you in the right direction. This helped, I guess, but with the lack of coloring when it came to its atmosphere, it becomes formulaic in its overall presentation, when all the buildings look the exact same, and you just keep following streets that go on and on forever, with no sense of progression. This is odd, as when you're in interior environments, you come to find life with people walking around or talking to one another. I'm sure I'm looking way too deep into this, but I imagine there's a subtle visual imagery that can implicate how far gone the world has gotten with this gray and black, empty, lonely world, in contrast to the seemingly short and small life that is in these buildings, where people are struggling to survive. While there was no horror in the physical sense out in this open world, at least that I was aware of, there is the horror of the loneliness that you feel without any direction that makes you feel like you have
What's
no
up, chat?
purpose.
Say hello.
You feel
Like the
hopeless and
video,
vulnerable.
share it with
And
your
this
friends,
presentation in the
tell
gameplay
them
makes the player feel just
loser,
that.
whatever you want. Son of a...
Supposedly, there's an integration of a combat system to battle against the mutants, but I personally never once encountered any enemies in game after wandering aimlessly for a couple of hours. Without any sense of understanding of the language, I couldn't gain the sense of direction of what to do or where to go. I felt like the atmosphere alone was enough to keep me going for the time being. With my time spent in germs, I found this to be such an odd yet compelling game that feels so grand and big, but shallow and empty. It feels like uncovering lost media that I shouldn't be allowed to have, but I do. It's without a doubt one of the more unique titles that I still don't have a complete understanding of, and most likely never will. Imagine there's so much more in the gameplay and story that I only took a breadcrumb from it, and have so much more to fall down into this rabbit hole. But until there's a full English fan translation, I'm going to take some time away from germs and come back like the plague once it's finished. Picture yourself awakening in a world that's completely unbeknownst to you, a world that you've never visited, only being accessible in your dreams. Dreams that are vivid in their creativity, expressive in their imagination. Dreams where you find yourself exploring and getting lost in, where you walk aimlessly. Not trying to find your way out, but rather trying to understand this dream the more you dive deeper into this nonsense. This absurdity that you have no recollection of, nor will have an understanding of once you awaken from this weird dream of yours. Something you want to desperately piece together, but you just can't. A fragmented memory that is scattered across as pieces that are there to collect to try over and over to piece this obscure puzzle. This is the impression I got when playing LSD Dream Emulator. This is a horror game that I don't understand, and I imagine no one ever will. But I believe that this is the point of the game. There is no point in trying to decipher the secret message that is hidden in its environment. There is no objective other than to explore to your heart's content, to traverse this other world that is not possible to explore in real life, boldly in a life that is in our dreams. Dreams we have every day. The things you see in LSD Dream Emulator are at first glance weird and trippy, which reflects that as someone possibly taking LSD, and the experience is very reminiscent through its gameplay. Of course, that is one way to look at it, but I'm sure the idea here is exploring these worlds by the dreams we have. There's so much variety in this never-ending and expansive world that gives so much depth to this gameplay that it makes up for the lack of gameplay mechanics you'd find in any survival horror game, or just any game in general. This emulates that early adaptation of the walking simulator, where you do nothing but simply walk through this linear or expansive.
What is it? It's called Sparkster. It's for the Super Nintendo.
The inanimate objects to further this level progression, or just walk and follow a path that leads you into the right direction. The same can be said with the gameplay here. Finding yourself in a portside city late at night, seeing the parking lot, the shipping docks, or the buildings that
Unk, you call me Unk. I'm just because I'm 41 years old. How do you know I'm old?
It gives
Damn,
this
son.
familiarity that maybe you, the player, may have been here before at some point in your life. Maybe not specifically in this environment per se, but it feels personal and real enough to remind you of the time you're walking out at night by yourself around the city through this empty parking lot that happens to be close by the ocean.
Son of a
How
bitch.
about walking in this huge vast field of trees where there's nothing but grass and hills that could go on for miles and miles in this very expansive valley that feels like a hike you take with your friends or family, or this walk on the coast of the beach where you see this crystal blue ocean with its glistening blue water that sparkles and shines, while the rays of the sunlight beam off of it, giving the scent of beauty. But this has an immediate transition once you find yourself teleported to another world that is out of your control, and see yourself in this unexplainable and incomprehensible enigma that you can never solve and only witness before your eyes. It's one that is out of nowhere and completely unexpected to you. But at the same time, it's this subversion of expectations that feels unnatural, because this is an emulation of a dream that is personified as an actual game you can play. It feels like you can see yourself believing this weird and odd presentation before you. And it's in this theme that can, in a way, give a sense of discomfort and fear if a person in this gameplay can project those terrors you can find within these dreams. In many ways, LSD Dream Emulator can personify our fears with its seemingly procedural gameplay that shifts to something that, while we don't remember fully, nor can have any relation towards ourselves, is completely accurate enough in replicating this dreamlike experience to where it then feels familiar enough to feel personal enough to where you then have that sense of dread while exploring this world. There aren't any enemies that are after you constantly in this chase. There is no combat to fight off anything that is hostile against you. There are only these unexplainable sightings of creatures, inanimate objects that are either passive by doing their own thing or just completely in a place that is unknown to create a sense of fear in this gameplay to give that element of horror. There's so much here in this game that I imagine is still open-ended to be explored and isn't fully completely understood to this day, over 2 decades later, where this dedicated community to LSD Dream Emulator is still unraveling this fascinating oddity that still gives something new to wake up to the next day and explore. I personally have no idea if there will ever be another game like this one that somehow accurately portrays the dreams that we have experienced in some shape or form. That gives the sense of realism yet familiarity to create some sort of horror that is projected off of us. If you want to explore your dreams but in the format of a video game, then play LSD Dream Emulator and get lost in this nonsensical game that never ends.
Damn.
Clock Tower: The First Fear, developed and published by Human Entertainment, would be much of an experimental project, which would be an understatement, to say the least. The creator, Hifumi Kono, would want to adapt much of the tropes seen in horror movies from the 90s that adopted traits of vulnerable protagonists who couldn't defend themselves and were, in theory, useless and hopeless in their chances of survival, struggling against a bigger evil that would be a formidable force to be reckoned with in your hopes of survival. However, much of this creative liberty would be seen through as Kono.
Hey, you guys want to see two of my not my paintings, but paintings that I bought?
This is seen through its visuals in particular.
But you gotta promise that you won't get scared.
Work and pixel art conveying a 3D background to give depth to the atmosphere.
You guys want to see a painting?
Emphasis on attention to detail pertaining to the characters and their movements and facial expressions. And gameplay design that required creative thinking to solve puzzles with items.
You want to see it? Okay. You promise you won't get scared?
Towards your survival and your traversal through this exploration. There's a lot of depth seen here in just the first couple of minutes alone in only the first cutscene, where you find Jennifer Simpson, an orphan adopted by the Barrows family, along with other orphan girls, who convey the sense of emotion through their facial expressions. It's a technical feat in itself to see through pixel art how well designed the characters' motions are translated towards gameplay. Jennifer Simpson would find herself and her friends in the Barrows Manor, a family home to her adoptive family. What should have been relaxing and tranquil, a means of starting a new chapter in her life, turns into a horrifying scenario that escalates quickly out of nowhere, where most of her adoptive family goes missing instantly.
Yes, it is.
With nothing but her lonesome self.
You want to see another painting?
Forced into the ominous and foreboding manor while undergoing investigations of finding her family, whilst also avoiding the stalker enemy, the Scissor Man.
You can consider. You could also consider that painting to be anybody you want, you know.
Transitioning to gameplay, the player can find the environment that was previously mentioned is comprised of 2D pixel artwork that creates this immersive 3D layout in the manor. For the most part, you'll see the player traverse through the first floor and second floor, exploring many rooms as they are lettered across the liminal corridors. This gives an incentive traversal and a movement that is realized with point-and-click gameplay, which sees the player having to use the D-pad or joystick depending on the platform playing on, where you can scan the environment to click on anything. That highlights to the player that is accessible to be walked into via a room or hallway. This also can be seen in interaction with primarily the overall environment. This can range from turning on a light in a dark room, pushing crates to alleviate yourself to a higher platform in a previously inaccessible room, or finding items that are specific to level progression. One minute detail the player may come to miss is the icon on the bottom left of the screen that displays Jennifer's face. This may seem like a spectacle at first glance that gives that graphical quality to the gameplay with its advancement and the technical limitations the SNES was capable of handling at the time that may be your first thought at first glance. But in reality, the importance of this icon is rather in part due to how this coincides with Jennifer's gameplay design. If Jennifer were to move around the environment and interact with an object, her reaction would signify to the player that she may be in danger. Sometimes this can be from just looking at a disturbing inanimate object that makes you uncomfortable. But a more dangerous turn of events could be when interacting with a hostile threat like the aforementioned scissorman. This alerts the player for whenever they are in a situation where they find themselves in that is hostile. It critically shows the player when they can know next time and be prepared. It's a nice attention to detail, of course, but it's also a huge fundamental in the gameplay design of Jennifer's overall exploration, as that's all she has to go off of. There is no combat at all in this game, only your means of fleeing the area from an enemy or hiding while waiting anxiously for the situation to dial down. Exploration is another vital component of Clock Tower's gameplay, as much at the time, the player will undoubtedly get lost as you explore the manor in its expansive environment. Admittedly, having a map would have done wonders, as it would have, at the bare minimum, given an idea to the player's general location and allowed for hints of where they would have been and where they haven't been to. This is one of my bigger gripes with the integration in its gameplay, as exploration, while seemingly smooth in its overall traversal with this point-and-click gameplay, created the caveat of the environments becoming too similar to each other. Much of this environment, at least in its interior design, is basic at best. This is given the benefit of the doubt towards the graphical hardware limitations for its time, which led to compromises in the environment. But even then, it's still hard to distinguish much of this layout, as the more you progress, the more you feel like you aren't making much progression at all whatsoever. Once you thought you've seen everything from the manor, it just keeps going in this layout and it becomes cumbersome with this push to explore the environment. The best the player can go off of is the difference in color palette and the contrast to different interiors and rooms you come to find in the hallways. While this does give differentiation in its exploration, it's rather ironic as this use of assets is seen both times, such as these two bathrooms have the same layout, to give a hint of contrast to the latter. Exploration is unique and creative, as it allows for lots of creative freedom in interacting with the environment. It sets the idea that you should scrutinize each one cautiously, as it most likely has
Let's try another game
specific
before I go. I'll
to
take a shower and go to sleep.
that is needed
One more game,
progress.
and it's not
I
gonna be
imagine
Sonic
this will
Blast Man
frustrate
2.
players, however, as it is very difficult to notice what's specific to a more integral component that is
This
an item
game,
that
not
you need,
playing
as
before.
opposed to just a 2D pixel art backdrop, that is merely for presentation. It requires lots of attention on your behalf, but usually indicates by highlighting with the cursor to what may be important for the player. However, it's in this exploration that could be entirely against you, as doing the most innocent and monotonous action without any harmful intent could lead to the player dying unbeknownst to them. It's a huge slap to the face of how out of left field these actions on the player's behalf can lead to their death in the most silly ways imaginable. Not only that, but also in this interaction, it can be detrimental to the ending you may get. There are a total of 9 endings, which are determined by your actions, which gives stakes in how you choose to advance the environment, but also replayability throughout each consecutive playthrough. In theory, can be a positive thing, as it allows for different approaches to experimentation, a highlight in Clock Tower's gameplay. But it also creates this detraction from garnering that interest, as you have no idea as to what is right and what is wrong. I think having a checklist of the ending that the player got, depending on the actions they committed, would have at least given a breadcrumb on what to avoid and what to do next, instead of committing the same action verbatim. The player won't remember the specific actions they need to do for 9 playthroughs. I imagine it would be easily forgettable. I will give credit to where credit is due, with the visuals and the sound design
I
in the
remember this
gameplay.
game.
For what it's worth, This game creates an amazing atmosphere with its attention to detail. I lightly touched on the presentation of the visuals that the gameplay heavily utilizes, with the notable feature being the emotions and facial features you can see when interacting with the characters, or simply just exploring the manner as Jennifer. It's honestly technical wizardry as to how they were able to produce this, with such limitations that you can tell they knew what they were doing in the visual department. Usage of light in closed and open rooms gives a glimmer of hope, while dark areas give a sense of dread of how there is never once any music to create that tension. Rather, it's just solely Jennifer's footsteps to create that ambiance of the lonely and quiet atmosphere.
I'm so tired. All right, guys, I
And
gotta
when
go to
that
bed.
build-up eventually leads to
Gotta
the
shower
climax,
first.
it comes
Then,
with
but
this
thank you so much for
wonder
joining
of
me.
a
I appreciate it.
soundtrack when encountering the
Leave a
scissor
comment,
man.
like the
It's
video,
his
and tell
thing,
all your
and I
friends
love
about
it.
me. See ya.
While it does immediately detract from the more horror elements, as it's a bit hard to take